Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for Community Conversations with Roberta. Today, we've got Meaghan McDermott with us today, and she's the Supervising Attorney and Project Director of the Community Lawyering Initiative at Maryland Legal Aid. Roberta, please take it away.
Thanks. Joining me today is Jessica Freeman, and she is not only a big part of this presentation today, but she is literally my right hand. That's showing my left. Anyway, Jessica is my fabulous administrative assistant, and she jumped on this project so that we could help all of you learn more about legal aid and how you can get the help you need. So Meaghan McDermott is the Supervising Attorney and Project Director of the Community Lawyering Initiative at Maryland Legal Aid. The initiative conducts mobile legal clinics in community spaces around the state. And Meaghan has been with Legal Aid since February of 2017. Prior to Legal Aid, she worked for 8 years as an attorney advisor for disability and health programs for the federal government. She graduated from our very own University of Maryland School of Law and also earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Maryland. So I'm going to have Meaghan talk a little bit about the background of Legal Aid and basically what major initiatives they have and how they help the community. So Meaghan, can you tell us a little bit more about Legal Aid?
Sure, and thanks for the introduction, Roberta. So Maryland Legal Aid has been around for over 100 years, and we provide civil legal services to Maryland residents. So an easy way to think of civil legal services is things that are not criminal. So we don't go to criminal court. We help with things like landlord-tenant issues, disability benefits, family law, so custody and child support. We also help with some issues that are sort of criminal adjacent, like expungement and civil forfeiture. So those are considered civil for our purposes. We don't help with immigration law. So that's one thing to know. And we're statewide, so we have offices in several counties throughout the state. There's 12 offices. Our biggest office is in Baltimore City, and then our second largest office is in Prince George's County, in Landover. And so, yeah, that's sort of the basic rundown of Legal Aid.
Awesome. And as you can see on our screen, the website for the Legal Aid homepage is right there, www.mdlab.org. And we're going to start with our first question for Meaghan.
Okay. So you mentioned all the different types of law that you practice. Are there any requirements that Legal Aid has for a client? So are there any restrictions as far as nationality or being a citizen?
There are. So I'd say the first requirement is there's income guidelines. So Legal Aid helps low-income Marylanders. We're trying to bridge that gap for folks who don't have access to the justice system and to the courts. It's quite staggering how many people can't access help for civil legal services. As most people know, when you have a criminal case, you can use a public defender if you can't afford a private attorney. But there's nothing like that that's required for civil legal services. And I think it's something crazy, like 80% of people who have a family law case, so divorce, custody, or child support, go to court without an attorney. So that's a huge number, and it's big stuff, right? When you're worrying about your kids or leaving a partner, things like that. So income is one of the major guidelines, and people often ask, so what's the number? How much can I make and still qualify for legal aid? And I can never give an actual number because it kind of depends on your age. So sometimes if you're older, we might be able to help you even if you make more money. If you have a family of 6 versus living alone, their income is going to be different, spread out across 6 people than across 1 person. So there are sort of different guidelines in there, and I think it's best to check it out. Give us a call or apply online or come into one of our offices and see if you qualify. And then as far as citizenship, that is a requirement. So because of our federal funding, we're limited to helping folks who are here who have documents. So if you're a green card holder, you're eligible for our services. And then people with certain types of visas. So things like a T visa, where someone is in the country and they have experienced human trafficking or violence in their home country, they can qualify for our services. Also, there are some exceptions. If you are experiencing intimate partner violence and you are not a citizen, there are often ways that we can help you with your case. So again, I think it can never hurt to ask, and we keep all that information private, so you don't have to worry about anyone else, knowing your status when you come in for an intake.
Great, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That is a lot. You are busy folks. So how did you arrive at legal aid?
That's a great question. So you mentioned in my bio, I worked for the federal government for almost a decade after law school. And then I live in Baltimore City. And there was a man named Freddie Gray who died in police custody in 2015. And prior to that, I would say, just personally, I wasn't super involved in my city. I kind of lived in my little bubble and didn't think maybe as much as I should have about, my neighbors who might be low income or experiencing racial inequity or things like that. But after Freddie Gray died, I became involved in some of the protests around following his death, and just realized that I wanted my work life to sort of reflect my own personal values a little bit more. So I left the government and was hired at Legal Aid. And interestingly enough, the program that I work for, Community Lawyering Initiative, started as a result of Freddie Gray's death. So we do these community clinics, and the very first one was in the library in Sandtown, Winchester, where Mr. Gray lived. So that library stayed open during the uprising following his death. And this was before I was at Legal Aid, of course, but our executive team recognized that we needed to be in that community in a fuller way. So they asked if we could go into the library and offer free legal services once a week. So that's how the program started. And then we grew and we started coming to your library and to other community centers throughout the state of Maryland. It's just kind of interesting how the universe works sometimes, sort of that personal and professional connection sort of collided for me.
Absolutely. I mean, that really sounds to me like a tragedy was turned into something positive for the community.
I hope so. Obviously, there's still a lot of challenges, but it's, hopefully a little bit of a part of the solution.
Absolutely. That's an amazing story. So I know that a hot topic right now is President Donald Trump and a lot of the executive orders. So recently, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they put forth an order that lasts until the end of the year to prevent some evictions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's being called an eviction moratorium, but at Legal Aid, we don't necessarily like that word because it's a little bit misleading. The CDC put this protection in place, and it's certainly not a bad thing, but there are some challenges with the moratorium. It's more of a stopgap, I think, than a moratorium. And there's going to be a lot of words. It's going to be confusing. So anyone has trouble following along, of course, give Legal Aid a call. But the CDC says that landlords can't evict anyone for failure to pay rent between now and December 31st. But you also have to certify that your reason for not paying rent is related to COVID. So maybe you can't work, your work no longer exists, your restaurant you're working in shut down. Maybe you can't work because you have to take care of your kids. Your kids aren't back in school or in daycare.
You took my question.
Yeah, that's a big challenge right now. And then also, if you can show that if you were going to be evicted, you'd end up being homeless or having to, sleep in apartment with your grandparents, that increases the risk of COVID. Now, the thing is, your landlord can still file for eviction. So you can still go to court for this. Mm-hmm. Every state is interpreting this a little bit differently, but that's what we have heard from our district court, which is where you go for these failure to pay rent cases. Your landlord can still file, and when you go to court, which is another reason it's important to have an attorney, you can present this defense saying, these are the reasons, I shouldn't be evicted. You also can still go to court now for different types of landlord-tenant issues. So breach of lease, tenant holding over, these are all terms I know that may or may not know, but just to say that there are reasons other than failure to pay rent that your landlord can evict you and you can go to court. So not saying that to scare people, but just saying, to be prepared if you see court documents coming in, or if your landlord has given you notice, that you should kind of be aware of those issues.
And that's a change, though, from how evictions were being handled sort of more in the beginning of the pandemic, isn't it?
So yeah, in the beginning, there were a couple different protections in place, and some of them are still in place. So Governor Hogan, he keeps calling his protection a moratorium too, but it's really not. It's also this defense I was talking about, where when you go to court, you can say, this COVID situation happened to me, so I shouldn't be evicted. So Governor Hogan put that in place. And then also for a while, the courts were shut down. So that's something that I think is really important that folks know, that a landlord can't just come to your house and say, get out. You have to go through a court process to be evicted. You go to court, then the court issues a warrant that goes to the sheriff, and then the sheriff comes to your house, and the landlord and movers, the sheriff essentially supervises these movers moving your property out of the home. So it can't happen just your landlord knocking on your door and saying, hey, get out. Landlords do try to do this though. So if that's happening to you, please know that that's illegal and you have to go through this court process. So for several months during COVID, the courts were not open at all. And so these couldn't really move forward. And then slowly the court started to reopen. So certain types of cases were being heard. And again, it's very confusing because some people were in the middle of eviction cases. Those started to be heard again. Can new ones be filed? New ones started being filed in September. So there is sort of a lot of different moving parts. And if you can get an attorney right now, pay for one yourself or come to legal aid, it is really important to kind of know all the different protections that are available to you.
Absolutely. That sounds very confusing without somebody that knows how to navigate it.
It is confusing. And honestly, as attorneys, we're still a little bit confused because we saw the CDC thing come out. We were like, yay. But then we heard from the court that we were still going to have to go to court and litigate these cases. And it's kind of unclear to us too, because the courts are just starting to reopen for these eviction cases. And we don't know exactly how the court's going to handle them. And also judges are human beings too. So some judges are a little friendlier towards tenants. Some are a little friendlier towards landlords. And we just aren't sure until we get in there and start litigating these cases this coming month, what is going to happen. So it's a little bit of a scary time.
Do you think they represent? They don't represent the landlords, do they?
We do not. Legal aid does not represent landlords. And look, I get it. I've been on lots of these talks now where landlords are like, but hey, I depend on that income too. And it's tough. It's a hard time for everyone. So one thing I do want to say is that legal aid has a wholly owned subsidiary called the Maryland Center for Legal Assistance. It's a physical space in some of the courts, including the court in Upper Marlboro and Prince George's County. But there's also a telephone number and a chat option where you can talk to attorneys. And those options, they don't represent you in court like legal aid does, but they can provide advice. And they have no income requirements. So even if you make a lot of money, you can talk to them. They can talk to landlords. They can talk to people who are not citizens, undocumented folks. So if you're falling into one of those areas where you're hearing me and you're like, oh, I don't qualify for legal aid services, but I still need help, you can reach out to them for some guidance.
That's great information.
What happens when December 31st is done and January, the new year starts? I mean, I think, there's a lot of things in place right now through the state that end in December. So I'm sure it's a crystal ball situation because we really don't know what's going to happen. But do you think this will be extended, this stopgap measure?
I don't know. And I think that's the other concern that we have. So, and something else that's important for people to know. So say you qualify, you're not going to be evicted right now. The District Court in Maryland has said that judgments can still, they won't be entered against you, but starting right now, January 1st, they can be. And the tough part about that is all your rent is still going to be owed to your landlord. So the CDC implemented this moratorium, but they didn't provide any kind of rental assistance to back it up. And that is something I wanted to mention. I believe right now that Prince George's County's rental assistance program is not open. I think they were overwhelmed and it's at least temporarily closed. Governor Hogan has implemented some new measures in the past week or so for rental assistance. One of them, we don't know exactly how that will work either, but all this money came into the state and each county in Baltimore City can apply for a piece of the pie, basically, and then use that money to help with rental assistance. So we don't know who is getting what and how it's going to work yet, but that is rolling down the pipeline. And then there's also there's a housing relief program for folks in certain types of housing. So it's through the Department of Housing. And if you know you live in one of those properties, you might be eligible. And there's a form you need to fill out and give to your property manager. And this is a really cool program because it's helping people with 4 to 5 months of their rent. The April through August rent, they might not have been able to pay. And if you think you might qualify for that, it's really important to maybe reach out to legal aid or ask your property manager. I know sometimes there can be sort of adversity between tenants and property managers, but right now property managers want to get paid. So if you qualify and then they qualify and can ask for this rebate, they're going to do it so they can get their money. So it's definitely worth having a conversation. And the word you want to think about is low income housing tax credit. So if you think that you are in housing with that, bless you, then that might be, you might be eligible for this program. So certainly something to think about. There are some rental assistance programs, and we're hoping there will be more because that's going to really be the key come 2021 when all these folks have these judgments entered against them. I saw a statistic today that I think 42% of Marylanders could face eviction in 42% of people who rent. I'm sorry.
Right.
42% of Marylanders who rent will be facing eviction if it weren't for the CDC stepping in right now. So it's quite a high number of people, almost half of renters.
That's quickly approaching half.
Yeah.
Do you know of any other federal memorandums or orders during COVID that you think that the community should know about or that legal aid is sort of involved with that you can speak about?
Yeah, I do. So another important federal one is for our homeowners and for landlords who are financing their properties. So if you have a mortgage through Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or any other kind of federally backed loan, other examples might be if you have a loan through the VA, or through USDA, that would be an example. But Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, a lot of people have loans financed through those providers. Like I think 60% in Maryland of mortgages are financed through those. There's a moratorium on foreclosures for those types of loans right now. And you can ask for a forbearance, which means you're kind of delaying your mortgage payment or paying what you can for now. So same situation where you will owe the money, that is not going to go away, but it protects you in your home for the time being. You do have to request a forbearance. They don't just give it to you. So you need to reach out to your mortgage lender and ask for that. But they should give it to you. And a lot of that's through the federal government, but a lot of private banks and mortgage companies are providing things that are similar to forbearances right now. So it's certainly worth an ask. It's not going to happen automatically, but you can ask if they might be able to give you sort of that delay in paying your mortgage. It could be up to 3 months. It could be 6 months. It's worth an ask. So that's a big
definitely
thing.
Forbearance. It's not forgiveness.
Correct.
I think that's an important point to make. Because I don't want people to think that, I'm off the hook, so to speak.
And that forbearance, I'm definitely not an expert in this field, and we do have people at Legal Aid who this is their whole practice. But the money that comes owed, it gets complicated with mortgages because you have to kind of do something with that additional money that you owe when the forbearance is over. So some people miraculously might be able to pay it off, but a lot of people will have to refinance And refinancing isn't free either. So, there's pros and cons to the forbearance, but at the end of the day, if you only have limited income right now and need to feed your family, it might be the best option. But you're right, it's not forgiveness. None of this is forgiveness. So that definitely is a challenge. So that's a big federal thing. And I also wanted to point out one more thing that folks might want to know statewide, which is utility shutoffs. So that's been extended also. Your utilities can't be shut off until November 15th. The utility service, they are allowed to start sending you letters now starting October 1st, asking for their money. But they can't, right now, they can't turn anything off until November 15th. And I will say that has been regularly extended throughout COVID, so I wouldn't be surprised to see another extension. But just so people are aware right now, that's happening. And that's for gas, for water. It's for those of you who still have landline telephones. It does not include cell phones. And right now does not include internet. I know for a while there was a stoppage on Wi-Fi on the internet, but now that's sort of up to the personal provider. And I think some local counties and cities have some stops on that, but there's not a statewide stop on that right now.
And am I mistaken, do they have sort of a stop during the colder winter months as well?
Yeah, so that is real. That usually does, that is a thing in the winter where they won't turn things off. They won't evict people either when the weather is below freezing. So things, obviously, to keep people alive, they do have that. But that's sort of an ebb and flow kind of thing, not a guarantee.
Right. Okay.
So I'm really thankful to Legal Aid because they provided our staff with training so that we know what you do when someone eventually walks into the library, or even calls us through our call center. They ask about legal aid. We give them your information. How long does it take to hear from a lawyer generally?
So it kind of depends on your intake method, I would say. So my unit, we used to only do community intake. So we only did intake in a physical space, in the library or in a school. But once COVID happened,
made that a little hard.
Right, exactly. So that's not a thing right now. But so we switched in March. We have an email address and a phone number, which I think has been shared on the screen and probably will be shared again. With that number or that email, someone will respond to you within 48 hours. But once that happens, not including the weekends, once that happens, you have to go through our intake process. So that's the thing we talked about earlier, where we're checking to see if you qualify financially. There's also a thing called conflicts. I think that's something important for folks to know. Legal aid, just like any other law firm. So if we represented your previous spouse for divorce like 10 years ago, we're not going to be able to represent you in the custody case now because that's a conflict of interest. So we have to check for those types of things when you call us also. Once you go through the intake process, then it'll be anywhere from 24 hours to a week before you actually hear from an attorney to see if we'll take your case. So just because you go through intake doesn't mean we'll be able to staff your case. We wish we could help every single person that comes through, but the need is much greater than we're able, to provide legal services for. So if you're an attorney watching this and you want to volunteer, you can also email or call me and come help us out with some of this caseload. The more pro bono volunteers we have, the better, so we can sort of address the need.
So how are you funded, basically?
Oh, there's a lot of different, for my unit especially. So we have federal funding through what's called the Legal Services Corporation, and that's a mandate from Congress, and we get a big chunk of money from that. We also receive funding from a similar state organization called the Maryland Legal Service Corporation, and they provide a lot of funding also. My unit, because we didn't exist until 5 years ago, we rely on smaller grants as well. So we've had grants from the Able Foundation, from Hirshhorn. Sometimes, private firms or individuals will donate small amounts of money. My unit also has a community development block grant and I think we have a couple of those, including one in Prince George's County, if I'm not mistaken. So we kind of piecemeal a lot of different funding sources together. Yeah.
So can customers, our customers or our viewers watching, could they actually donate to legal aid?
Sure.
Oh, that's awesome. That's good to know.
Yeah, I know that when we're doing sort of like, for lack of a better word, funding drives, which always happen kind of around like November, there's a link on our website, but I'm pretty sure if you go to our website, you can click the drop-down menu and there's a way to donate. And honestly, if you are able to right now, I know it's very tough financial times for people, so absolutely no pressure, but we're a nonprofit, so $10 goes a long way. Things like our Maryland legal aid pens that I have right here, those fly off the shelf at clinics. So anything to help is definitely appreciated.
Awesome.
So I know that you've probably faced this problem before, but what happens when a potential client comes to you and says, I have court tomorrow?
So it's not ideal. It does happen a lot. I think, court is scary, even for lawyers who go to court all the time. We're intimidated by it, so we get it. But when you get a document in the mail from the court, don't ignore it, because it's not going to go away. And the quicker you can get help, the better. Because if there's someone there that can help you, if we can assign an attorney and get into court the next day or later that week, we'll try. But a lot of times we can't, because you have to go through that intake process. And also it hurts your case, because there's a process called discovery in court cases where there's sort of a statutory time period where your side and the opposing side can get documents from each other and discover things about the case. And it really helps to be able to go through that process, because if your landlord has an attorney, they probably have gone through that already, and they've probably requested documents from you, and they've done a lot of research. And then if we have to go into court the next day, we now don't know what they have. We don't know what you have. We haven't had time to gather documents that could help provide a defense so that you're not evicted. So, we'll try if you come in, if you're coming in hot with court the next day, we'll try. But the sooner you can come to us, the better. And the more documentation you have, the better. Especially if, going back to the eviction and COVID thing, which I think is the biggest issue facing people right now. You want documentation from your work saying that you were laid off, or that your hours are being reduced. You want documentation from your kids' school saying they're not reopening. Things like that. Paperwork is really, really important. So we can, build the best defense for you that we can.
And speaking of courts, so you mentioned courts are reopening. Are they fully reopened? And should clients still be going to court with their attorneys?
Courts are not fully reopened. The beginning of October is the target date for full reopening with jury trials. So if, like me, you got your jury notice during COVID, you could just throw it in the trash because jury duty was not happening. But that will be back in October, and we don't know exactly what's happening. I know there's some juror forums via Zoom and things like that right now, so we'll see. But the court's in sort of a stage 4 reopening, the second to last reopening stage right now. I know in Prince George's County and a lot of the courts across the state, they're trying to do a lot of hearings virtually still. But there are some that have to take place in person for various reasons. So if you're really uncomfortable with going to court, you can request to have a virtual hearing. If you have an attorney, you can ask your attorney to request that, and you can try to do it like we're doing right now and have court that way.
Well, if you do I didn't know that was available. That's great.
Yep, that's happening. And someone from my unit, had a custody hearing today, and it was virtual like this. And you can call into, but I think it can help to sort of to see a face. But yeah, and then if you do have to go to court, it's important to know you're going to have to wear a mask. There's going to be a questionnaire that you have to answer about if you've, hanging out in Florida or Texas, the states that have sort of higher positivity rates. And if you're feeling sick, things like that. we thought maybe it would be kind of slower getting into the courthouse, but at least in my experience so far, and this is just anecdotal, others might not have this experience, it hasn't been busy. So it's been fairly easy, to get in. They're spacing out hearings and they're trying to keep distancing within the courtrooms as well. And they're trying to do, a good job with that. So it, of course, isn't 100% safe, but the courts are trying to maintain social distancing and cleanliness guidelines and things like that. But I certainly would say it doesn't hurt to request a virtual hearing if you can, if your case qualifies for it. I think a lot of the rent court's kind of, we often refer to it as sort of the wild, wild west of the legal world. So a lot of the rent court, which is the failure to pay rent and eviction actions, those are going to be in person. Most likely, just because of the nature of how quickly they move and how many there are. So it just depends. So, talk to your attorney, look at the notice you get from the court to see what it says, where you should go, or what types of technology you might need to use.
It made me think of another question. So you said that evictions, they don't happen in a day, so to speak. So your landlord can't evict you that day. How long typically does it take?
So, it really depends. And sometimes it depends on how busy the sheriff's office is in your local jurisdiction. But I think it's best, I always try to give the shortest timeline possible. So after you go to court, say the judgment is entered against you. So the court decides that you're going to be evicted. And you have 4 days to appeal. And you and your attorney decide, there's no way, I'm not going to appeal this. After that, they can issue what's called a warrant of restitution, and that goes to the sheriff's office. And then the sheriff's office, it depends on your jurisdiction. There's a certain period of time that they give tenants and landlord notice about when they're going to do the eviction. So it can be a week or 2 weeks. I'm actually not sure how long it is in Prince George's County, but there is a time period and you will receive notice of it. And then after that, it just depends on when they knock on your door. But if you have any relationship with your landlord, you can talk to them, because I think people don't realize the sheriff himself or herself doesn't come into your house and just throw your stuff out the window. The landlord has a moving company that will be doing it. And the sheriff is just there to make sure, because it's upsetting, that no one, gets in a fight or your stuff isn't broken when it's removed from the property. So you will have some time, but once you go to court and the court says that you're being evicted, you really need to have a plan in place. You need to figure out where you are going to at least be able to spend some time, because once that eviction goes through, you don't want to have to sleep on the street or try to go into a shelter. It's challenging right now. A lot of shelters are very full. And also there's a lot of concerns around COVID in the shelters as well.
So, the community calls the library for everything, and we are here for them. And sometimes we just need guidance as well on how to answer questions. So if someone were to call us and feel unsafe at home, what should the library staff tell them to do? Can they call legal aid? Is there something that you would recommend for them to tell?
So that's a tough question, because they can call 911. So if a landlord is doing something improper, or if they feel unsafe, because they're experiencing, violence from a partner or something like that, they can call 911. Calling 911 can be scary for a lot of our clients, though. So that, you have to take that with a grain of salt. And that's something I always tell our clients, that it's a personal decision that they have to weigh, whether or not they want to get the police involved. If it's sort of a real life or death matter and something is happening right then and there, 911 probably is the best bet. And if not, then they can wait. Then reaching out to legal aid is always a great idea. And even though we're lawyers, we do have a lot of connections, I'm sure, just like the library, with other community resources. So we can try to connect you with social workers or with housing assistants, folks who can help you. We have lawyers that are embedded in places that serve people who are suffering from intimate partner violence. We have a veterans attorney who can help veterans with their issues. So we might be able, to help with some of that stuff. And if you're concerned about sort of unsafe living conditions, like your landlord isn't fixing something in the home, again, as long as it's not dire right then and there, but might be a leak or a problem with rodents, that's something legal aid can help with as well. That is something you can go to court for. It's called rent escrow. You can't just stop paying your landlord, unfortunately, but you can go to court and start paying your rent money to the court, and they hold it while your landlord fixes the thing in your house. So I hope that helped answer your question a little bit.
I didn't
Well,
know
it
that.
brought up another question for me. What if the potential client is a child? Do you serve children?
For the most part, we do not. So there's an exception. Well, there's a couple of exceptions, I should say, actually. So legal aid does have the contract for most of the counties in Maryland for CINA, children in need of assistance. So for most people, that would be foster kids. And if there's a child in foster care, legal aid is often appointed to be that child's attorney. Now, the child doesn't choose that necessarily. It's mandated by the state. We have a contract to do it. So it's not like the kid can call and be like, can legal aid be my attorney? We're assigned to those cases. And there's other attorneys that help with those cases too, but we do the bulk of them in Maryland. For the most part, we don't take on minors as clients. And two other exceptions that come to mind. So it's always worth a phone call. Kids that qualify for food stamps, and they are citizen children of undocumented parents. So the kid qualifies for the food stamps, but mom and dad wouldn't because they aren't documented. In that case, we can represent the child because they're the recipient of the benefit. And that actually happens a lot, and it's confusing because, again, the kid being the applicant for the food stamp benefit, they get denied a lot. So that's where Maryland Legal Aid comes into play, and we can help them receive the benefits. And of course, we talk to the parents. We're not just talking to the kid. And then also teenagers who become parents. If you are under 18, but you are a mom, then we can represent you because the state of Maryland recognizes that as a parent, you have now taken on a lot of responsibility and need to be treated as an adult. So in that case, we could help a minor child in that situation as well.
Great. Yeah. Do we want to open it up to our viewers to ask some questions of Meaghan? I think there was one up at one time. So if it comes back. Okay, Christine says, how long does an intake take? Does it take a full day?
I feel like I'm giving a lot of lawyery answers, which are, it depends, but it does depend. So we have a couple different ways of doing intake right now. As I mentioned, the email and phone number that flash up across the screen earlier, but for Prince George's County folks, there is walk-in intake right now. We're encouraging people, if they can call or communicate via email, to do that because of COVID. But if you're unable to, or you really need to give a lawyer documents in person, you can go to our Prince George's County office, and they're open for walk-in intake. I wrote it down, from 9:30 to 4 during the work week, Monday through Friday. So if you go to Legal Aid's website, that has a list of all of our offices and the intake hours for all of the offices. So you can, if there's one that's closer to you, you can go to that one instead. I will say the in-person intakes usually take a little bit longer, but for a good reason. They're usually able to get more information in person if you have documents on you. They can be made, a copy can be made right then and there. So that could take a couple of hours. It just depends on the case. If there's a lot of documentation, for example, if it's a Social Security disability benefit appeal, those often go on for years, and there's tons of documents, there's medical records. Those need to be copied. That could take, 4 or 5 hours. Sometimes when someone calls our intake line, and I don't usually do the intakes, our wonderful paralegal, Nellie, does those for the most part. She might only be on with you for half an hour, especially if you don't have a lot of kids or you don't have any minor children, you're unmarried, it's just you, and all we need is your information, and you're getting an expungement. That intake could take 20 minutes. So it kind of just depends on what your legal issue is. But I would say it's a good rule when you give us a call to give yourself an hour, schedule out that time. but we'll work with you. If you have to go in the middle of the call, we can always reschedule it for a later time or something like that.
So it looks like we have another question from Taylor. Does income include stimulus or unemployment help?
That's a great question, and we're not including that. So before COVID, the answer would be a little bit different, but right now we're not including that. And there also is a little bit more wiggle room on our end right now for folks who have lost income due to COVID. So, if you've lost a job, but your partner is still making $100,000, you're not going to qualify, most likely, for legal aid unless you have a really, really large family. But if you're kind of on the borderline, we might be able to make some exceptions. So that's why, again, it's always worth a phone call. And as I mentioned before, we have a lot of resources in the community. So we might also be able to point you towards a different legal resource. There's other providers that do what's called low bono. So they're not totally free, but they're kind of there to bridge the gap for folks who can't afford a private attorney but don't qualify for legal aid services. And you might be able to pay, a couple $100 for them for the life of your case.
That's good information. So we're going to just pause for a second, see if any other questions come up. But this is really useful information. I'm learning so much today. So thank you, Meaghan.
Sure.
Is there things that can be filed electronically as well?
Sure. So most of the counties in Maryland are on what we call MDEC, one of those acronyms where I'm trying to think if I even know what it means, but it's our electronic filing system for the courts. Prince George's County and Baltimore City are not on it. Neither is Montgomery County right now. Yeah, so most of the counties are on. There's a rollout period. I forget who goes next. Baltimore City is last. I would making an informed guess that COVID might have slowed down the rollout process. There is still a drop box at most courthouses where you can drop things into a drop box to file things. If you have an attorney, they're going to file things for you. So we're still filing a lot of things by mail if it's in a jurisdiction where we can't use the electronic filing system. And I guess I actually should say the electronic filing system is for attorneys. So a person who's representing themselves doesn't use the e-filing system. So they would still need to go to the courthouse to drop off documents. But even if we can't represent you at legal aid, we can walk you through that filing process. It looks a little bit different depending on what kind of case you have. You might have to serve somebody. It can be complicated, but we might be able to help walk you through how to do that. And so can MCLA, our subsidiary.
Awesome.
Well, that's really interesting that no e-filing for Prince George's. So that's where my husband has to go to file these things for the clients.
Yeah. It's been a slow rollout in Baltimore City. We're really looking forward to having it as well. But all these things take time, and they have to redo all the systems and all of that. So
another question, which is a really good question from Richard. He says, can legal aid help if my roommate left and won't help with rent anymore? Landlord doesn't seem to care.
Richard, that's a good question and a common one. You are not alone, my friend, even though it probably doesn't help you feel much better. This happens to a lot of people. And the answer is I would need to see your lease and see who signed the lease. So if you and your if you and your roommate both signed it, the challenge is, so let's presume that you and your roommate both signed the lease. It is likely that even though he left, you are still responsible for the entire payment. It could depend on if your lease has you just sharing a room and him or her just renting a room, you might not have that. But for a lot of leases, you're both jointly responsible. And since you're still there, the landlord is going to be pestering you for the rent. But please do reach out to legal aid. We can review your lease, and there might be some COVID protections in there as well right now.
So, question about that. If you have gone through the intake process, but don't qualify for whatever reason, would you still advise or check the lease, or would then they be going to the other subsidiary?
That's a good question. So it depends on why you don't qualify. So if you're over income, if you make too much money, or you're a conflict, that situation I described before, where maybe we represented your previous spouse, so now we can't represent you. Those two things, we can't talk to you at all. We have to refer you to a subsidiary. But if it's a situation, so for example, in a divorce case, for legal aid, we generally don't litigate divorce cases unless they're contested, which means that the parties can't come to an agreement, and unless the parties have minor children. We have to prioritize because a lot of people get divorced. So we have to sort of say, what's the biggest issue here? And for us, it's let's protect kids. Let's protect a partner who's experiencing intimate partner violence. So those are kinds of things where it would push you to the front of the line for your case qualifying. But say you just need sort of assistance with a simple divorce. We wouldn't go to court with you, but we would probably help you, if we could find someone to staff it, fill out paperwork, which is a complaint. So drafting your divorce complaint, we would help you maybe fill that out. We would tell you which court to take it to. We would explain how service works, how you send that document to the other party, and sort of give you a timeline for about how long the process would take. So it's some limited assistance, not as much, but still some.
And do you have any low Bono partners that maybe specialize in family law, or do you have low Bono partners that specialize sort of in all of the types of law that you specialize in?
We do. We have partners that we sort of generally refer to. And then also in Prince George's County, there is a sort of a family law assistance program in the circuit court. I didn't look before this, and I should have, to see how they're operating right now with COVID. But a lot of them have gone to sort of online or phone intake services. So it would certainly be worth giving that a Google and seeing if you might qualify for those services. I would see MCLA is one of our biggest go-tos just for advice. That's our subsidiary. And there's a couple different organizations. I think Community Legal Services in Prince George's County is one of them who help folks with the same types of cases that we help with.
That's great. And from the library perspective, we are going to continue these conversations. We are going to, with Maryland Legal Aid, have a program coming in the fall that's developing Know Your Rights with Maryland Legal Aid. So a lot of people say, do I have the right to fill in the blank? And there's, of course, tons of answers for every question, I'm sure. So we want to continue this conversation. Also, through pgcmls.info, there are legal forms found on Gale Legal Forms in our online resources, and that's flashing up on our screen as well. So if you need some basic legal forms and want to look at them before you call legal aid to say, do I need this form or this form, there is some things out there that you can review before starting your endeavor. So I'm going to give one more shout out for see if there's any more questions from our audience right now. And if there are not, then I will see if either Jessica or Meaghan have any last words of wisdom. And in case you hadn't noticed, Jessica is married to a lawyer, so she speaks much more fluently than I do. A dinner table conversation, I'm sure. So
I wouldn't say I'm qualified as an attorney, and I can't legally say that, but I do have a good bit of experience now.
Yeah,
that my husband and I have been married for 12 years.
Very, very well. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So Jessica, any more questions you have for Meaghan?
I think we covered all of my questions. I really appreciate you joining us today, Meaghan.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I just wanted to say I know I talked a lot and probably a little bit fast. So I think if people tune into the Know Your Rights presentations coming in the fall, we'll dig a little deeper into some of these legal issues and hopefully answer more questions and be a little bit more specific.
Well, because the plan, right, is to do sort of one topic per session so that you can
Exactly.
get a little bit deeper into them.
Sure.
Exactly.
A great introduction to all of the wonderful work that legal aid does for our community and our state. Again, if you go on their website, you will be able to get what you need and hopefully either start the process, or if you're just feeling generous like I am and say, hey, this is great work and want to donate, we totally encourage that as well. So Meaghan and Jessica, thank you for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. And we just want to say thank you again, and for also partnering with the library.
Thank you guys. Anytime.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.